The galaxy's greatest mistake. The Galactic Council had conquered 47 star systems without firing a single shot. Their method was elegant and proven. They arrived with overwhelming force, demonstrated their technological superiority, and waited. Every species eventually surrendered. Fear was more efficient than war. For 3 centuries this approach had never failed. Commander Vethric stood before the holographic display of Sol 3, the planet its inhabitants called Earth. His scales reflected the blue glow of the projection as he studied the data. The planet was divided into hundreds of competing territories. Its people waged wars over resources, beliefs, and invisible lines drawn on maps. Their weapons were primitive. Their space presence was laughable. A few satellites. Some rusted stations. Nothing that could threaten a civilization that had mastered faster than light travel. The Council's xenobiologists had submitted their report months ago. Humans were emotional creatures, prone to panic and self-preservation. They valued comfort and safety above all else. When faced with extinction they would negotiate. They always did. Vethric turned to his second officer. How long until the fleet is in position? 6 rotations, Commander. Good. We'll target their major population centers first. Enough to demonstrate our capability, not enough to make them extinct. We need workers, not corpses. The second officer hesitated. Sir, some of the data suggests humans can be unpredictable. Vethric's mandibles clicked in amusement. Every species thinks they're special. Every species believes they'll fight back. And every species kneels when they see what we can do. He gestured at the hologram. Look at them. They can't even unite their own planet. They'll surrender before the first day ends. 6 days later, the Council fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system. 300 warships, each the size of a human city. They positioned themselves in high orbit, weapons charged, shields active. Vethric sent the standard ultimatum. Surrender or face annihilation. 24 hours to decide. The humans responded within 3 hours. Their answer was broadcast on every frequency, in every language the Council had learned. No. Vethric stared at the translation for a long moment. Perhaps they hadn't understood. He sent clarifications. Images of previous conquests. Detailed projections of what would happen if they resisted. Evidence of the Council's unstoppable military might. The humans responded again. Come and take it. The first strike hit New York at dawn. The energy beam carved through skyscrapers like they were made of paper. Millions died in seconds. Vethric waited for the surrender transmission. It didn't come. He struck Beijing next. Then Mumbai. Then Lagos. Each strike was precise and devastating. Each one should have broken their will. Instead, something unexpected happened. The humans started fighting back. Their military forces scrambled into action with no coordination, no plan, but with a fury Vethric had never encountered. Fighter jets that couldn't possibly reach orbit tried anyway. Nuclear missiles, primitive but numerous, screamed upward toward the fleet. Ground forces fired everything they had at the landing craft. It was chaos. It was inefficient. It should have collapsed immediately. But it didn't. Sir, they're not retreating, his second officer reported, confusion evident in his voice. They're attacking landing parties with everything. Military. Civilians. They're using tools, vehicles, even their bare hands. Vethric watched the combat feeds in disbelief. A human child had thrown a burning bottle at a war mech. An elderly human had rammed a ground transport with a civilian vehicle. None of it made tactical sense. They were outgunned, outmatched, facing certain death. They fought anyway. By the end of the first week, Vethric had lost more soldiers than in the previous 30 conquests combined. Not because humans had better weapons. Not because they were stronger. But because they refused to accept reality. They refused to understand that resistance was pointless. The xenobiologists had been wrong about one critical detail. Humans weren't driven by self-preservation. They were driven by something the Council had never encountered in such concentration. Spite. Vethric received reports from the surface. Humans were dragging damaged Council technology into underground facilities. They were studying it, reverse engineering it, adapting it. Species weren't supposed to do that during an invasion. They were supposed to hide and surrender, not learn and adapt. A transmission came through from the Council homeworld. They demanded an update. Vethric's mandibles tightened. Resistance is heavier than anticipated. But we will prevail. They cannot win. What he didn't say, what he was only beginning to understand, was that winning and surrendering were not the same thing. The Council could destroy every city on Earth. They could turn the surface to glass. But these humans, these illogical, emotional, stubborn creatures, would keep fighting even as their world burned. In his 3 centuries of service, Vethric had never seen anything like it. The other species had been afraid of death. Humans seemed to have made peace with it. They didn't fight to survive. They fought because the alternative was kneeling. And somewhere in the smoking ruins of Earth's cities, in the makeshift laboratories hidden beneath the rubble, humanity was doing something that would haunt the Galactic Council for generations to come. They were learning. A transmission came through from the Council homeworld. They demanded an update. Vethric's mandibles tightened. Resistance is heavier than anticipated. But we will prevail. They cannot win. What he didn't say, what he was only beginning to understand, was that winning and surrendering were not the same thing. The Council could destroy every city on Earth. They could turn the surface to glass. But these humans, these illogical, emotional, stubborn creatures, would keep fighting even as their world burned. In his 3 centuries of service, Vethric had never seen anything like it. The other species had been afraid of death. Humans seemed to have made peace with it. They didn't fight to survive. They fought because the alternative was kneeling. And somewhere in the smoking ruins of Earth's cities, in the makeshift laboratories hidden beneath the rubble, humanity was doing something that would haunt the Galactic Council for generations to come. They were learning. Evolution under fire. 3 months into the invasion, the Galactic Council held an emergency session. Vethric stood before the assembled representatives, his scales dulled from stress and lack of rest. The holographic projections around him showed casualty reports, resource expenditures, and tactical analyses. None of them looked good. Explain to us, Commander, why a species that hasn't mastered interstellar travel is causing this much difficulty. The Council speaker's voice carried centuries of authority and growing impatience. Vethric chose his words carefully. The humans are not fighting a conventional war. They adapt faster than any species we've encountered. When we destroy their command structures, they operate independently. When we jam their communications, they use primitive alternatives. When we take their weapons, they make new ones. From what? Another council member demanded. They have no advanced materials. From our materials. From salvage. From anything they can find. Vethric pulled up footage from the previous week. This is what they're calling a resistance cell in what used to be Tokyo. Watch. The video showed humans moving through destroyed buildings with disturbing efficiency. They wore armor pieces scavenged from fallen council soldiers. They carried weapons that were bizarre hybrids of human and alien technology, held together with welds and wires that shouldn't work but somehow did. They moved like predators who had learned to hunt in their own ruins. A council engineer spoke up. That's impossible. Our weapon systems have genetic locks. They require specific biological signatures to function. The humans bypassed them. They've been doing it for 6 weeks now. Vethric switched to another image. This is what they're building in underground facilities across the planet. The council chamber fell silent. On screen was a spacecraft. It was ugly, asymmetrical, covered in mismatched plating and exposed systems. But it had council shield emitters grafted onto a human hull design. It had propulsion systems that combined both technologies in ways that violated every engineering standard the council had established. It worked anyway. They're calling them Frankenstein ships, Vethric explained. Named after some human story about creating life from dead parts. They launched 17 of them last week. Our fleet destroyed 12. 5 made it through and conducted successful raids on our supply lines. The silence stretched longer. Finally, the speaker asked the question everyone was thinking. How is this possible in 3 months? Vethric had asked his xenobiologists the same question. Their answer had disturbed him more than any battle report. Humans have a concept they call necessity. They say it's the mother of invention. When survival is at stake, they don't follow normal learning curves. They don't wait for proper training or perfect understanding. They experiment, they fail, they try again. Sometimes 100 times. And somehow, eventually, they succeed. On Earth's surface, in a bunker beneath what used to be London, Dr. Sarah Chin stared at the disassembled council weapon on her work table. She hadn't slept in 40 hours. Her hands shook from exhaustion and too much caffeine. Around her, 24 other scientists worked at similar tables, all of them racing against time and death. The power coupling doesn't match any of our connectors, her assistant said, frustration evident in his voice. Then we make new connectors. Sarah's voice was raw. She'd lost her family in the first strikes. Her sister. Her parents. Her 6-year-old nephew who'd wanted to be an astronaut. They think their technology is too advanced for us. They think we'll give up because it's too complicated. She picked up a cutting torch. They're wrong. Across the planet, similar scenes played out in hundreds of hidden facilities. Humans who had been engineers, teachers, students, and mechanics before the war were now becoming something else. They were becoming survivors who refused to accept limitations. Every captured piece of Council technology was torn apart, studied, understood, and reimagined. The aliens had made a critical error. They had given humanity something to learn from. By the fourth month, the Council fleet started encountering new problems. Human fighters that had been easy targets were now coated in reverse-engineered shield technology. Their missiles, once ineffective against Council armor, had been modified with alien explosive compounds. Their tactics had evolved from desperate chaos into something more dangerous: organized fury. Vethric watched his strategic displays with growing unease. The humans had learned guerrilla warfare from their own history and adapted it to space combat. They hid in asteroid fields. They used debris as cover. They struck from unexpected angles and vanished before the Council could respond. When Council ships landed to establish forward bases, humans would attack with coordinated strikes that combined conventional weapons with stolen alien tech and pure human viciousness. "They're learning our patrol patterns," his tactical officer reported. "They're predicting our movements. Sir, I think they've hacked our encrypted communications." "That's impossible. Our encryption is—" "I know what it's supposed to be, sir. But look at this." The officer pulled up intercept data. "They're jamming our frequencies with our own technology. They're spoofing our IFF signals. They're making our ships think other ships are enemies." Vethric felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 centuries of military service. Not fear exactly, but close enough. The humans weren't just defending anymore. They were evolving, learning, improving, and they were doing it while their planet burned around them. In what remained of Earth's governments, human leaders held constant emergency meetings. Military generals worked alongside civilian scientists. Corporate executives shared resources with former competitors. National boundaries that had divided them for thousands of years suddenly meant nothing. The aliens had wanted to conquer a divided planet. Instead, they'd created something that hadn't existed before: a unified human species with a common enemy. "We can't match their numbers," a general said during one strategic session. "But we can match their technology now. And we can do something they can't." "What's that?" asked the Prime Minister of what used to be the European Union. The general's smile was cold. "We can fight dirty." In orbit, Vethric received casualty reports that made his blood run cold. A Council destroyer had been destroyed not by superior firepower but by a human ship that had rammed it at full speed, its pilot refusing to eject even as his vessel disintegrated. Another warship had been disabled when humans had somehow smuggled a virus into its computer systems during a boarding action. A third had been crippled by weapons that shouldn't exist, cobbled together from human creativity and alien technology in combinations that made no engineering sense but worked anyway. The speaker contacted him again. "Commander, the Council is considering withdrawal." Vethric wanted to feel relief. Instead, he felt something else. "They'll follow us." "What?" "These humans. We've taught them too much. We've shown them they can fight us. They've learned our technology. If we withdraw now, they'll keep building, keep improving. And someday they'll come for us." The speaker's hologram flickered with what might have been fear. "Then what do you suggest?" Vethric looked at his tactical display. At the planet that should have surrendered in 24 hours but had instead become a nightmare. At the species that refused to understand they were supposed to lose. "I suggest we finish this, before they finish evolving." But in his core, in a place he would never admit to the Council, Vethric suspected it was already too late. The humans had discovered something about themselves during this war. Something that had been sleeping in their genetics since they'd evolved from primitive hunters on an unforgiving world. They were very, very good at surviving. And even better at making their enemies regret attacking them. The war was about to enter a new phase. And this time, the Council wouldn't be the ones choosing when and how it ended. The answer. 6 months after the invasion began, Vethric received a report that made him question everything he understood about warfare. A human fleet had been detected on the edge of the solar system. Not salvaged Council ships. Not the crude hybrid vessels they'd been building in desperation. These were something new. Real warships. Human-designed, human-built, incorporating everything they'd learned and adding innovations the Council had never considered. "How many?" Vethric asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. 63 capital ships, Commander. Twice that many support vessels. They're broadcasting a message. His communications officer paused. "It's addressed to you personally." The message played across Vethric's screen. A human woman in a military uniform stared directly at the camera. Her eyes held no fear. No hesitation. Just cold, calculated purpose. Commander Vethric. My name is Admiral Lisa Okafor. 6 months ago you came to our planet expecting us to surrender. You killed millions of us to prove your point. You thought we would break. She leaned forward slightly. You were wrong. We don't break. We adapt. And now we're going to show you what humans do to those who attack our home. The transmission ended. Vethric's tactical display lit up with alerts as the human fleet began moving. Not toward Earth, but toward his fleet's position. They were attacking. The species that couldn't even leave their own solar system 6 months ago was now launching an offensive against the Galactic Council armada. Battle stations, Vethric ordered. Prepare all weapons. Deploy fighter screens. The Council fleet moved into formation, confident in their superior numbers and centuries of military experience. They had 300 warships to humanity's 63. The math was simple. The outcome should have been certain. The battle began at extreme range. Human ships opened fire with weapons that made Vethric's sensors scream warnings. They'd taken Council energy weapons and modified them, increased their output beyond safe levels, sacrificed efficiency for raw destructive power. It was reckless. It was dangerous. It was devastatingly effective. The first Council destroyer exploded before it could raise shields. The second took critical damage to its propulsion systems. The third managed to return fire, but human ships moved with an agility that shouldn't be possible for vessels of that size. They're using our maneuvering thrusters but on a different power distribution system, his engineering officer reported in disbelief. It's burning through their fuel reserves 3 times faster than efficient, but it's giving them acceleration we can't match. Vethric understood immediately. The humans had calculated the length of the battle and decided they didn't need fuel efficiency. They only needed to win or die trying. It was the same logic they'd applied to everything. No concern for long-term sustainability. Only immediate, overwhelming effectiveness. The battle raged for 6 hours. Human ships fought with a creativity that bordered on insanity. They used debris as weapons, accelerating chunks of destroyed vessels into Council formations. They fired missiles on trajectories that made no sense until they curved around at impossible angles, revealing hidden propulsion systems. They deployed electronic warfare tools that crashed Council targeting systems with what appeared to be modified entertainment broadcasts set to frequencies that overloaded alien sensors. One human ship, heavily damaged and venting atmosphere, deliberately positioned itself to block the firing solution of an entire Council battle group. Its captain broadcast on open channels as his ship died. 5th Street Elementary. That's where my daughter went to school. You bombed it on day 3. This is for her. The ship exploded, taking 2 Council vessels with it. Vethric watched his fleet falling apart in real time. Not because the humans had better technology. Not because they had superior numbers. But because they fought like every battle was personal. Like every ship lost was a debt that had to be repaid. They took casualties that would have made any other species retreat. They accepted losses that should have broken their morale. They kept fighting anyway. Sir, we're receiving multiple distress calls from the surface, his communications officer announced. Ground forces are under attack. Coordinated strikes across all continents. The humans are launching a full counteroffensive. On Earth's surface, millions of humans emerged from hiding. Not just soldiers. Everyone. Civilians with makeshift weapons. Scientists with experimental technology. Children throwing rocks at war mechs because it was the only thing they could do. The Council's occupation forces, already demoralized by months of endless resistance, found themselves facing a species that had decided death was preferable to surrender. In orbit, Vethric's fleet continued to crumble. Human ships pressed their advantage with ruthless efficiency. They'd studied Council tactics for 6 months. They knew how Council ships moved, how Council commanders thought. And they used that knowledge to devastating effect. A transmission came through from the Council homeworld. The speaker's hologram appeared, his usual composure completely gone. Commander, withdraw immediately. This conquest is over. We can still win, Vethric protested, though the words felt hollow even as he said them. At what cost? We've lost 100 ships. The humans have reverse-engineered our technology and created their own. If we continue this war, they'll spread beyond their solar system. They'll bring this fight to our worlds. The speaker's voice dropped to something that might have been fear. We made them into something worse than they were. We need to end this before they decide to end us. Vethric looked at his tactical display. At the human fleet that had been built in underground facilities while their world was under bombardment. At the species that had learned to fight in space in 6 months because the alternative was extinction. He thought about the humans he'd underestimated. The ones who'd taken his technology and made it better. The ones who'd united their fractured planet against a common threat. The ones who'd refused to kneel. All ships, he broadcast to his fleet. Cease fire. Prepare for withdrawal. The human ships stopped firing, but they didn't retreat. They maintained their positions, weapons still charged, clearly ready to resume combat if necessary. Admiral Okafor's voice came through on the command channel. Commander Vethric. You came here to conquer us. To make us another species that surrendered without a real fight. You wanted workers. Subjects. Another easy victory to add to your list. There was a pause, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of every human who died in the past 6 months. You need to understand something. Humans don't surrender. We adapt. We learn. We survive. And we remember. Another transmission, this one from Earth's surface. It was being broadcast on every frequency, meant for every member of the Galactic Council to hear. A simple message, spoken by a child who'd lost everything but hadn't lost hope. We're still here. And we're not afraid of you anymore. The Council fleet withdrew, jumping to hyperspace in ragged groups, leaving behind the wreckage of their failed conquest. They left Earth's solar system, but they couldn't leave behind what they'd created. A human species that now knew they weren't alone in the universe. That knew they could fight and win against impossible odds. That had been forged in fire and emerged stronger than anyone had predicted. On Earth, in the ruins of cities and the underground facilities, in the makeshift shipyards and research labs, humanity began to rebuild. But they were building something different now. Not just homes and hospitals. They were building ships. Weapons. Technologies that combined human creativity with alien science in ways that made both more effective. They were building a future where no one would ever make the mistake of attacking Earth again. In the council chambers, thousands of light years away, the assembled representatives watched footage from the battle. Watched a species that should have been primitive and divided stand united against overwhelming force. Watched them adapt and evolve and fight with a determination that bordered on supernatural. The speaker addressed the council with words that would become policy for the next century. The humans are to be left alone. Permanently. We will not trade with them. We will not communicate with them. We will certainly never attack them again. Let them build. Let them expand. And pray to whatever gods we have that they don't decide to come looking for revenge. But the council's prayers were irrelevant. Because light years away, in a solar system they'd thought would be an easy conquest, humanity had learned the most important lesson of all. They were not prey. They never had been. They just needed someone to make the mistake of attacking them to prove it. And the galaxy would never forget. Admiral Okafor stood on the bridge of humanity's first true warship, looking out at the stars. The same stars the Council had traveled across to attack her world. The same stars humanity would now explore, not as victims or subjects, but as a species that had earned its place among them through blood and sacrifice and stubborn refusal to accept defeat. She thought about the millions who'd died. The cities destroyed. The families torn apart. And she made a promise to their memory. Never again. The human fleet began spreading throughout the solar system, establishing defenses, building more ships, preparing for a future that would be written on humanity's terms. They'd been attacked by a civilization that thought they were weak. That thought they would break easily. The Galactic Council had learned the truth the hard way. Humanity doesn't break. Humanity adapts. And anyone who forgets that lesson does so at their own peril. The age of easy conquest was over. The age of humanity had begun.